She was walking home from school along a familiar route, the kind of walk she had taken countless times without incident. Jessica Ridgeway kept to the sidewalk in her Westminster neighborhood, backpack slung over her shoulders, thinking about homework and the afternoon ahead. It was early October, and the day was ordinary enough that no one noticed the moment when a car slowed nearby. Within minutes, Jessica was gone. Her parents realized something was wrong when she never arrived home. The afternoon stretched into evening as calls went unanswered. By nightfall, police cars filled the streets and neighbors poured out of their houses to search. Officers canvassed blocks, knocked on doors, and followed any lead that might explain how a 10-year-old could disappear in daylight from a quiet Colorado suburb. The urgency sharpened with every hour that passed. The investigation moved quickly, driven by the reality that missing children face the greatest danger in the first days. Detectives collected surveillance footage from nearby businesses and reviewed tips from the public. A description of Jessica spread across the region as volunteers organized search parties. Fields, trails, and drainage areas were combed while officers worked through the possibility that she had been taken. Days later, the case turned grim. Human remains were discovered in a field north of Denver, miles from where Jessica had last been seen. Testing confirmed what everyone feared. The search for a missing child became a homicide investigation. Grief settled over the community, heavy and disorienting, as parents held their own children closer and wondered how something so violent could have happened so close to home. Investigators followed the evidence outward from the crime scene. They examined how the remains had been transported and what that suggested about the offender. Attention returned to the neighborhood where Jessica vanished. Detectives re-interviewed residents, reviewed vehicle sightings, and looked for anyone whose movements did not align with the normal rhythm of the area that afternoon. The break came when police focused on a nearby home occupied by a teenage boy named Austin Sigg. He lived close enough to the route Jessica walked that day to have seen her regularly. Investigators learned that Sigg had a history of troubling behavior and an obsession with violent crime. As officers dug deeper, they uncovered items and statements that placed him at the center of the case. When confronted, Sigg confessed. He described how he had kidnapped Jessica, taken her to a remote location, and killed her. He admitted to dismembering her body in an attempt to conceal the crime, a calculated effort that underscored the seriousness of what he had done. The confession ended the search for answers, but opened a new chapter of horror as the details became known. The revelation that the offender was a teenager stunned the public. Sigg was just 17 at the time of the murder, legally a minor, but accused of acts typically associated with seasoned offenders. Prosecutors moved to charge him as an adult, arguing that the nature of the crime demanded it. The legal process that followed forced the community to confront difficult questions about youth, responsibility, and punishment. In court, the facts were laid out methodically. Evidence corroborated Sigg's confession, from physical findings to timelines that matched his account. Jessica's family sat through proceedings that revisited the worst moments of their lives, listening as attorneys described how their daughter had been taken and killed. There was no defense that could change the outcome. The focus became accountability. Sigg ultimately pleaded guilty, avoiding a trial but ensuring a sentence that would keep him imprisoned for decades. The judge imposed life in prison without the possibility of parole, a punishment reflecting both the severity of the crime and the determination that society needed protection from him. The sentence brought a measure of finality, though it could not undo the loss. For the Ridgeway family and their community, the case left scars that did not fade with time. Memorials appeared where Jessica had been last seen, small gestures of remembrance in a place forever altered. Schools revisited safety procedures, and parents spoke more openly with their children about awareness and caution, even in places once considered safe. In the days between Jessica's disappearance and the discovery of her remains, the community lived in a state of suspended breath. Search teams gathered before dawn and worked until nightfall, guided by maps marked with grid lines and instructions from law enforcement. Helicopters passed overhead, while officers coordinated tips coming in from across the state. Every reported sighting, every unfamiliar vehicle, and every fragment of information was logged and checked. The process was exhaustive, driven by hope, even as the odds narrowed. Detectives also examined digital trails. They reviewed online activity, social media use, and any communication that might explain how Jessica had been approached. The absence of messages or planning pointed investigators toward an opportunistic crime rather than one built over time. That conclusion made the neighborhood itself a focus, a realization that unsettled residents who had believed familiarity offered protection. When Sig was arrested, authorities emphasized the importance of methodical police work and public cooperation. The case advanced because tips were taken seriously and evidence was preserved carefully. Investigators described the arrest not as a moment of relief, but as the beginning of accountability. The reality of what had been done required a careful, deliberate response from the justice system. The decision to try Sig as an adult was debated publicly, but prosecutors maintained that the crime met the legal standard for adult charges. They argued that age did not diminish the planning, violence, or aftermath of the offense. Defense attorneys raised issues related to mental health and maturity, but those considerations did not outweigh the facts presented in court. During sentencing, statements from Jessica's family underscored the human cost behind the legal language. They spoke of a child who loved school, family, and simple routines, a life interrupted in a way that no punishment could repair. The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered the sentence, acknowledging both the permanence of the loss and the responsibility to protect the public. Long after the case concluded, its impact continued to shape local memory, influencing conversations about safety, responsibility, and community care. Community discussions shifted toward prevention and support, emphasizing vigilance without surrendering trust. Jessica's name became associated not only with tragedy, but with calls for awareness and compassion, reminders carried forward by those who refused to let her be defined solely by the way she died. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.